This video is going to show you solo Grandmaster Nightfall getting platinum rank on the Fallen Saber this week. This time the big difference is that we're not on Titan for once. I've spammed Titan a lot this season. I've played a lot in videos and stuff, so I want you to sort of come away from that and do some other class runs, because if you're not on a Titan and you're playing on another class, the Grandmasters are quite a bit more difficult than what they are on a Titan. It's just how it is at the minute. So as I said, it just intrigued me to sort of do a run with Arc 3.0 Hunter, but not on Gathering Storm Super, because I'm sure most of us know how that will go. It's a range super. It's a safe way of doing it. For most people, you should be using Gathering Storm if you're not comfortable with this particular GM. But I went with ARCSTAFF with Raiden Flux, the old build from years ago, 2017. So it's a very old build. It works similar to as it did then, but now you can jolt targets and stuff like that. The last time we done the Raiden Flux setup was last season on a solo Grandmaster, so I want you to see how different it is now with Arc 3.0. Does it still melt barriers? Because if you remember from that video, I was one cycle and barriers, sometimes 2 barriers for one super solo on a Grandmaster. It's insane. The reason for that is because of stun and stagger damage, we'll talk about in a minute. But what I'm doing now here is just speeding up the footage, because I'm just doing the Warsat exploit. You use the cherry emote to make sure your head is within the Warsat, then you will be able to capture the transmat zone, run out the transmat zone. You will then still have champions alive, enemies will despawn, and then you can deal with champions. What you'll notice there, though, I shot my gun as I was walking or running out of that zone to aggro. It's a chance to aggro one of the overloads on right side. If you can do that, it's getting that overload away from that barrier so he's not tethered. If that doesn't happen, then just kill the barrier first, because it'll tether both overloads. Next, we'll deal with the barrier. Obviously, as you can see, I'm using the exotic auto rifle, Stormchaser, right? That it's basically a hybrid auto rifle slash grenade launcher, kinetic GL. So you can get the grenades prepped or loaded ×3. That just happens over time. You also have these homing missiles that happens over just hits, right? So it's got grenades happening all the time. It's a fantastic weapon for barriers. It's not intrinsic to the weapon, it's just because it's barrier for auto rifles this season. So this is actually a fantastic choice. I understand, though, some people won't even have it because they haven't pre-ordered Nightfall, right, which I would totally understand with the state of the game at the minute. I generally don't use something like this where it's out of reach, but at least I can showcase the weapon off if you haven't pre-ordered, so that you know if you did pre-order, then you know what you're getting, right, in terms of how good. And it's a fun weapon, very fun weapon. It's super strong. As I said, it's hybrid auto, hybrid GL, and it turns it into a mini mountaintop. And it happens quite frequently, so you can really spam this weapon fantastic on champs. So with this first room, obviously we're going to play from left hand side. I'm going to try and get some of the exploded shanks down. There's 4 that spawn. They are the key at the minute. I'm going to put some damage in, but go left as soon as I can. Then we've got a grenade. It's very important that you use a pulse grenade right where I just did, right, so it'll get some damage on those enemies, and hopefully you'll have all 4 shanks killed, because they will chase you into this corridor. This is where we're going to play from. What I'm now doing is waiting on all the invisible marauders to come, or marauders, because you can actually, after time when you wait, eventually they push. Now you can hear if they're up, if there's any marauders up, because their invisibility makes a noise, and you can hear the audio cue on it. There's an actual audio cue to tell you when there's marauders close. Focus on your pulse grenade when there's a bunch of enemies outside like that, well, out around that corner, as he takes them all out. He does all that chain damage. You definitely want to go with the pulse, because storm grenade doesn't last long enough on a hunter or a warlock builds. On Titan, obviously you go on storm, but on other builds, then you're using pulse. Pulse is the best because it just lasts quite a long time. It's really good on champs, really good on unclear and all that stuff. So now it's to deal with the back of the map. Notice we've got super. The super is going to deal with the ads that are immune by the barrier, which there will be, and there'll be snipers, so they'll be deadly. Now, if the Overlord is not tethered, you can try and kill, but the funny thing was, the barrier then started to tether the Overlord, so I had to disengage from that. But that's when we went in with the super, right? As you saw there, the ARCSTAFF super just melted down the barrier without the barrier shielding. The reason for that is because of stun damage, what I mentioned before. The amount of stagger and stun this super is doing, there's no stat in the game for this, which does annoy me. All weapons, some supers have like sort of stagger and stun damage, right? Well, because of how this super works and its close quarters, it's tricking the AI to try and stomp you. Or I know obviously a servitor can't stomp like that. That's why they're not threatening. But if I was to do this on any other champ, like a Vex champ, like I did on the previous season, right? The barrier's not wanting to shield. They're wanting to engage with me because I'm right close up to them. The AI of a champ will change if you're very close, which generally you won't be in a GM, will you? But we get super damage resistance. Obviously we're using Raiden Flux for the massive damage with the synapse junctions, stacking with lethal current, the aspect. So you dodge, and the combination that you do is light, heavy. So for me it's R1, R1, R2. But it's dodge first to get the lethal current, right? But they are kind of difficult to hit a little bit because they're floating targets. But once timed right, it's very satisfying just to kill a barrier without even need to pulling out a barrier weapon. And as I said, you can do it. And you can clear out any ads surrounding that barrier that are tethered as well. So it's a very useful super, and that's why I wanted to showcase it in this run. So we're just going to take out the remaining snipers. And there's 2 overlords outside to take. There's usually one on that little stair area, so I'll just take the overlord from here. The only problem is when you do that is when they're stunning behind that sort of fence, which is quite annoying. I can't hit their crit spot, and because of the strong aim assist on this bow, it's aiming for the head even though I'm aiming for the body. But the head is at the fence, so therefore I'm not hitting the champ. Very difficult. So aim assist's working against me there because I'd rather get the body shot because I've got explosive payload on, because I can't see the crit. But because of the aim assist being so strong on console, which it is, we know this, right? Then it's working against me. That's where you can have where you're not stunning champs and stuff. But that's why you want to sort of not deal with champions there if you can help it. But it is a safer way of doing it rather than coming out when there's 2 overloads up. When there's 1, you're really safe at that point. The risk is low when there's only 1. When there's 2, not so much. Because there's different types. The Arc overload captains, the ones that have the tracking, those are dangerous. The solar ones, they're not dangerous. Especially when they're overloaded, because they're just shooting at the same zone. They're not aggroed on you at all when they're overloaded. When they're not, then they are quite dangerous because they're going to keep TPing everywhere. So with the orb phase, right, now I'm going to clear out the 2 snipers with my bow. You can get amplified off these and use the amplified buff for the orb. After testing that I've done, I found it to be less consistent though, as I prefer to have I prefer to just do it the slide way. I feel as though you go too fast when you're amplified, and you want to have a grenade for the way I'm doing it. Without a grenade, it ain't going to work. So you want to go just as the right side arc wave is about to sort of go down the lane. Right, then you just want to slide, right, keep sliding. Then the grenade here, stop at this midsection, then go left, right? Your goal is to at least have that exploder shank explode from your pulse grenade. If that happens, you beeline it for the dunk, easy. Providing that you do it like that, but it's so easy to die. If that arc charge hurts you at all, you're dead. Instantly. There's no surviving it. Unless you like bubble or something. But that's Titan. You know? Or well. I don't even know if you can survive in a well. But that's the timing on how you do it solo anyways. So this room isn't too bad either. Your goal is to try and take out the first overload that's spawned in and the ad surrounding. But what you need to understand is you're timed The next ad wave, which is going to include barriers and exploder shanks, are going to be coming quite shortly. So it's a case of, if you are going to start to deal with the overload and all the ads are free, make sure that you melt the overload down. Refrain from using a super, because the super is going to do the work for the barrier. Use this, like if you're going to do Raiden Flux like me, then use it to its advantage, and that's where it's really good on barriers. Not so much overloads. It will one cycle solo an overload, providing that you've initially stunned with the bow or grenade, but for the most part, that's why we've got the Roman super on, because the barriers, when they tether everything, that's what makes things difficult for people. It's not. I actually would argue overloads are easier than barriers in this particular one, because they're easily stunned. We've got overload bow, the best overload mod in the game. We've got overload grenade, so I'm doubled up on that. So they're not a problem. The problem is when barriers tether said overload champs or sniper shanks, stuff like that, and you can get 2 shot off a sniper shank. Even with double arc resist and all that stuff, and T10 resil, you can still get like almost 2 shots. So you've got to be careful, right? So now what I'm doing is planning on taking out this barrier. Every time you kill a champ, you get 3 wretches. So you need to be aware of that. There's still a marauder there, but we're going to pop super, and this is where the combo comes in. As you can see, it's absolutely melting the champ. Took out the champ, and we just had half a super there still left. So if there's any other adds up, I could have cleared them out. Very good super. It is buffed by Arc Acute Burn, yes, but it's, as I say, still super strong. This Gathering Storm would be the easier play for most because it's ranged, right? And there's not much thought process to that. Just make sure you stick the champ or the boss, But like I said, there was no interest for me to do the run other than ARCSTAFF. When I looked at Arc Hunter, you must understand, when I do a run, I have a look to see if there's any interest for me that piques my interest. What piqued my interest was, well, how good will Raiden Flux ARCSTAFF be now? Because no one's using it. It's a dead build. And it should be a dead build because it has its uses. The problem is it's what you're up against. It all depends on what type of boss you're up against and stuff like that. So it's heavily dependent on boss design, really. If you've actually stunned a champ with your grenade, you can keep just using your linear because they're still overloaded because we've got disruptor grenades on. So I would still suggest that you run the disruptor grenades, because even though you've got overload on your bow, it's just doubling down on the overload. It means that you can just melt. You could just one cycle them basically. If you want to waste all your ammo, you can. So I just want to make sure I've got a grenade for the next section. I know that's sort of a small detail, but I prefer having a grenade because this is all about getting damage in as soon as you can with this barrier. The better you are doing this, the easier this section is, because the longer you leave it, the more the enemies are going to get tethered and you have to deal with all the snipers. So look, we've actually done some initial damage to the champ. This is great. We've primed the champ. Right, Stormchaser absolutely melts the barrier. Now we're going in with as much heavy as possible, just to melt that champion before the champ, because the champ's going to disappear around that corner. That's what that champ wants to do all day long. Just wants to disappear around that corner and tether the snipers, so that you're getting sniped to death and you can't take the barrier. That is the difficulty of this room. But if you melt down the barrier like I just did, you've removed the difficulty out off the room. Because the overloads aren't a problem at all. You just need to make sure that you take out all the dregs and the ads surrounding the overloads. Once you've done that, it's all about angles. Make sure that you can only see one overload at any given time. Get a good angle. Like I've got a good angle here. I know the cluster of the overloads want to stand next to that entrance, or should we say the exit. So I'm going to sort of have my angle so that I'm not looking at the exit but on the left hand side, because I know one of the overloads will reveal themselves, which means I've isolated 2 overloads away from the one I want to take out. Makes them super easy. They will do the tracking shots like you can see, which is annoying, but that's why you've got to sort of really be careful with your positioning here. with the strafe. Don't just stand there around that corner trying to overload that champ over and over with the bow, because it's going to take quite a bit. So make sure you're doing your strafing, because this confuses the pattern of the arc attack. It means it's going to miss you. It's going to hit that cover in front of you, which is what you want. You want to do damage and not be hit. That is the key thing. And as you can see with the solar overloads, far easier, because they haven't got the tracking shots. I used a bit of heavy there because we've got heavy to pick up. Always do that. If you've got bricks to pick up for the next room, then use your heavy, man, and then pick up, refill up for the boss fight. You don't need max heavy, by the way, but I would say a good chunk of ammo you definitely want to have going into this. But there are opportunities to get more heavy at the boss fight as well. So while there's two servitors up, back and front, it's key that you melt one of them down, just in case, because the shanks from behind you can start to push and do damage to you, so you don't want to do that. So we use a bit of heavy, bit of Stormchaser just to take out one of the void shields. Now we can just focus on the other side, and it's no risk now because there's no ads behind us hitting us. Because even though it's just one shank, one or two, they continually do a good chunk of damage to you, so you don't want to keep receiving damage from behind. So the servitor's taken out. That's obviously going to spawn the boss in. What we're going to do is showcase the super offer. You can totally do this, providing that you do the combination. So we're going to start with a pulse grenade, super obviously immediately, then dodge, and then light heavy. Sometimes I might get the combination wrong, but for the most part you'll do almost a quarter HP if you get your timings right and everything. Missed a couple of combos, which was slightly less damage. He did snipe us on the way. The shank did snipe us, but we were already heading for cover, so that was quite risky, but at the same time not too bad. I could have went earlier and done less damage and just come back here and then finish the boss off with my guns. And then that's obviously phase 1. Phase 1 is quite dangerous, phase 1 and 2, because the boss, as I said in my previous video, is a sniper. After that, the sniper gets destroyed and the boss will go to void, which is not threatening at all, really. And then at the very end, it's arc, the enrage mode. So your goal is to take out any shanks. Like, even if the barrier is full HP and you break a shield, stop shooting the barrier and take out the remaining shanks, then continue with the barrier. There's no rush for this. You can actually farm super. So I could have farmed the second super and used it for phase 2, but I didn't even do that. I just took down the barrier from here, because this is obviously your safe zone to fight from. And then we're going to issue a bit of heavy. Be careful of that charge. Keep an eye on the charge of the sniper on the top of the shank. You'll see it glow every now and then. But that's why you've got to strafe in and out with the linear. See, don't do sustained fire. Do a couple of shots, strafe in and out like that. That way you won't get sniped. So this phase, make sure that you take down the 2 exploded shanks and the 2 snipers above. That's what you're looking for right now. The boss's sniper has been destroyed, so even if you're out of position when the boss is immune, the boss will not snipe you. So that is now over. You can now free roam the map for ammo and stuff once you clear the shanks. You can leave the barrier up, because the barrier does void damage and it's not very threatening at all. And I recommend that you do that, because that's really your only safe time to go and pick up ammo, unless you've got shoot or loot. That's your safe opportunity to get it. So like I say, our heavy's a little too low for the final phases of the fight. We need a bit more heavy than what I've got, but I've got bricks on the floor there, you can see. So the goal here is I'm trying to prime this barrier to just, all I want to do is take down that shield, because it removes the tether. Then it's just me and the barrier. That's what I wanted to do. That was the goal. Like I said, you can free roam the map. You want to go to the opposite side of the map already. You don't want to stay in that zone, because the room actually rotates with the electrical tower things. The hazard areas, they rotate. So right now, the opposite side of the map where I want to go, that's got that electrical hazard damage, which will kill you instantly. But on the final phase, that is removed, and that is the next safe zone where you go. It's key that you know that. Once you learn that on where to fight from, this is not a hard GM. I've got 8 shots. I don't want to use any heavy because I don't know if 8's enough. I don't think it ended up being enough. So, just as well I didn't really use any heavy here. We just used the auto. So boss is now immune. We'll use a bit of the grenades loaded. Why not? Because we can farm that up really easy if we wanted to use that for final phase. I don't think I do. I just stick to using the arc linear. But I could have done. I could have used it. So obviously on this phase, I'm sure you're aware, but there's going to be a bunch of exploder shanks that are spawning. Rather than melt the boss right now, which would be highly risky, is possible, but it would be quite risky on this setup. Rather than do that, we're just going to basically do all the waves of the exploder shanks. One actually popped up there. I was quite lucky there for that not to explode on me. So it's just a case of fighting from here, taking out the rest of the exploder shanks. They are not infinite, this wave. It will eventually stop, and that's what you're waiting for. When that stops, it's just you and the boss, which is ultimately what you want. Don't get that boss to phase 4 until you're ready, though. So don't like try to over prep the boss to like 5% above phase 4, because if you're too keen on damage, you might accidentally set off phase 4 by exploding a shank on the boss, because it does some sizable damage to the boss, which can happen because they sort of surround the boss as well. So don't over prep the boss. There's no need for that. You've got plenty of time to prep. Once these exploder shanks stop, you've got all the time in the world really to do that, providing that you don't die. Obviously it's a trip to orbit if you do. This is where Gathering Storm would definitely help out people. So as I said, you don't have to do what I've done. You can copy the build exactly. The only difference would be that, well, you can't copy it exactly. You would use a different exotic. Probably Fortracer would be really good for this, just because you get a huge damage bonus when the boss is weak. When any boss is weak, or any champ. Fortracer with Gathering Storm will be a very good run. That's what I recommend. If you're not comfortable with doing ARCSTAFF, which I understand some people wouldn't. Up until now, though, it's been very good. Obviously, the final phase, not so much, because the boss does continual arc damage to you, and you're on a melee based super. And you can tank a couple of ticks of damage, which I've tested, but you can't tank it all for the remainder of your super. Like a full super, if you use your super and it's about to end, the boss will eventually kill you, even when you're in your super. So you can't just rely on the super for phase 4. You need a good chunk of heavy, and then you use your super as a panic button at the very end, because it will do massive damage. We've already seen that. One full super will do a quarter, but imagine the boss is at 10%, then one full super will be more than sufficient to clean the boss up. That's what the super's for. So the order that you do this would be heavy, 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 grenade, and then a super at the end if needed be. This is where you stand. This is actually a super safe spot to do DPS. If you stand where I am, when the boss enrages, the boss can't get to you, because the gap is too narrow for the boss. I know it sounds stupid, but it literally is that. This little pillar thing defends against the boss enraging. So the boss, next best bet is to go around, but then round us, there's a ledge protecting us, sort of thing. So I spam all my heavy. I've got 1 shot left. I'm going to use a pulse grenade because the snipers will spawn in, so you need to be careful of that. We'll use super now as our panic button because the boss is 10%, like I said before, to out tank snipers and stuff like that. But that was a solo GM using ARCSTAFF with Raiden Flux on a ARC 3.0 Hunter. Hope you enjoy. Thank you.